Lyra Morningside, Gavin Reeve, Elowen Kitt, and Jessa Rourke. 4 names that once meant nothing to the city of Austin, Texas. Today, they are stitched into a terrifying story the city will never forget. One by one, they vanished under the cover of night, leaving behind only symbols, fear, and a chilling pattern that pointed to something far darker. As Detective Marla Vexley raced to connect the pieces, she uncovered a buried secret tied to a forgotten summer and a broken boy named Emory Slate, a boy who would grow into the most terrifying predator Austin had ever known. In late September, Austin, Texas was beginning to cool down after a long, humid summer. Students returned to campus, food trucks lined the streets, and music floated through the air every evening. It was the kind of city where people felt safe, where the worst thing most residents feared was traffic or a lost wallet. No one noticed when Lyra Mendez disappeared. A 21-year-old college student studying environmental science, Lyra had a bright future and a reputation for being careful. She had gone to a music festival downtown with friends, but at some point late that night she got separated from the group. Her last known message was a text to a roommate saying she was walking back to her car, parked just a few blocks away. When she didn't come home, her friends initially thought she might have stayed over with someone or lost her phone. It wasn't unusual for young people to be spontaneous, but by morning, her bed was still empty, and none of her friends had heard from her. Her car was found later that day near a bridge that crossed a narrow, dried-out creek. The driver's side door was cracked open, the keys still dangling in the ignition. Her phone was discovered a few feet away, shattered as if someone had stepped on it intentionally. There were no clear signs of a struggle, just an eerie, uncomfortable stillness. The Austin Police Department launched a missing persons investigation, but early on, they treated it as a voluntary disappearance. Maybe she got into a car with someone she trusted. Maybe she needed a break from life and went away for a while. Maybe she'd show up on her own, tired and embarrassed. It was easier to believe that than to accept that something darker could have happened. Flyers went up across the city. Candlelight, vigils were held. Lyra's parents, who lived out of state, flew in and made desperate pleas on local news stations, begging for information. 3 days later, a jogger cutting through a construction site found Lyra's body in the dry creek bed, hidden beneath a large sheet of rusted metal. She had been carefully posed, her arms crossed over her chest, and there were strange, almost surgical cuts along her forearms and legs. Near the body, carved into the dusty ground with a stick or sharp rock, was an unfamiliar symbol, a twisted, jagged spiral. It wasn't a gang sign or any recognized graffiti. It felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Suddenly, the city's illusion of safety shattered. The medical examiner ruled Lyra's death a homicide. She had been killed elsewhere and moved to the creek, likely during the night. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no camera footage catching the crime in progress. Whoever had done this was careful, methodical, and had left almost nothing behind, except for the eerie symbol. Detectives began combing through Lyra's life, questioning classmates, friends, and even casual acquaintances. No one had seen anything strange. No one had a serious grudge against her. There were no jealous ex-boyfriends, no troubling signs of a secret life. What bothered investigators most was the silence. Usually, there were little clues, small mistakes the killer made, or patterns they could identify. But this time, the crime scene spoke only in riddles. It was as if the murderer had been invisible, moving like a ghost through the night. The media picked up the story quickly. News anchors spoke in grim tones about the first murder mystery to shake Austin in years. Online forums buzzed with theories. Some speculated it was a random attack. Others were convinced it was someone she knew. A few whispered about the symbol, wondering if it was the signature of a serial killer no one knew existed yet. Still, many residents wanted to believe this was a tragic, isolated incident. a bad person who passed through town and would soon be caught or would leave. It was easier to think that than to consider the alternative, that someone was out there right now, studying the city, choosing their next victim, already blending back into the crowd. Somewhere in Austin, a predator was still moving, patient and unseen, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. And the city, blissfully unaware, kept humming along, just as it always had. 2 weeks after Lyra Mendez was laid to rest, Austin tried to move forward. People returned to their routines, pretending that the horror had been a terrible fluke. The cooler nights brought more people outdoors, filling up bars, music venues, and food truck parks. Life in the city pressed on, but a quiet tension hung in the air, something unspoken that people felt but didn't talk about. It was during one of these cool evenings that Gavin Trelawney vanished. Gavin was well known around the downtown scene, a tall, charismatic bartender who worked the late shifts at a popular spot near 6th Street. He was the type of person everyone seemed to like, the one who could make a stranger feel at home after just one conversation. On the night he disappeared, Gavin closed up the bar just after 2 a.m. He told a coworker he was heading straight home, just a 15-minute ride on his motorcycle, but he never made it. The next morning, a gas station employee found Gavin's motorcycle parked awkwardly by the side of the building. The keys were still in the ignition. His helmet was strapped to the handlebars, something Gavin never did. It was as if he had stopped for a moment and then simply vanished. No customers had seen anything. Security cameras were mysteriously not working that night, a storm having knocked out power hours earlier. For a second time, there were no witnesses, no video evidence, and no clear answers. A city still mourning Lyra Mendez now faced another, unsolved disappearance. 6 days later, Gavin's body surfaced in the Colorado River. He had been weighed down by heavy chains, but rising temperatures and shifting currents had loosened them. His injuries mirrored Lyra's. The strange cuts along his arms and legs, clean and deliberate. And again, the jagged spiral symbol appeared nearby, this time carved into a piece of driftwood floating not far from the body. Detectives, who had initially tried to separate the cases, could no longer deny the truth. There was a connection. And connections meant patterns. And patterns, in the world of crime, meant something even worse: a serial killer. The city responded with panic and confusion. News outlets broadcast urgent warnings. Police presence downtown tripled overnight. Restaurants and bars that once stayed open past midnight started closing early. Flyers with tips for staying safe circulated everywhere. People stopped walking alone. Some even started carrying weapons. Still, under all the precautions, there was fear. A silent, growing fear that maybe nothing could stop what was happening. The Austin Police Department formed a special task force to track the killer. They brought in Detective Marla Vexley, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving impossible cases. Vexley wasn't from Austin. She had spent most of her career working violent crimes in bigger, rougher cities. Her eyes were sharp, and she listened more than she spoke. When she arrived and reviewed the 2 cases, she immediately noticed something others had overlooked. The cuts weren't just random, they seemed ritualistic, almost like a message or code. Whoever was doing this wasn't acting out of sudden rage. He was patient, controlled, and deeply motivated by something no one yet understood. While the city buzzed with rumors and theories, Vexley began working silently behind the scenes. She pulled records of violent crimes over the past 10 years. She looked for strange symbols in old case files. She cross-referenced missing person reports that had never been solved, but nothing matched the spiral symbol. Nothing fit the strange precision of the murders. It was like the killer had appeared out of nowhere, fully formed, already an expert at leaving no trace behind. The public wanted answers, but Vexley had few to give. All she could say was that people should stay in groups, avoid isolated areas at night, and report anything unusual. What she couldn't say, what she knew in her gut, was that the killer had already chosen someone else. Somewhere out there in the busy streets, another target was walking around, completely unaware. The killer didn't just strike at random moments. He hunted, he watched, he planned, and he was patient. There would be another body. It was only a matter of time. The city of Austin no longer felt like itself. Fear seeped into every corner, every alley, every late-night walk. Downtown, where streets once buzzed with laughter and music until dawn, became eerily quiet after dark. Jogging trails along the River, usually crowded with runners and bikers, stood empty. Yoga studios, coffee shops, bars, businesses that once stayed open late into the night, began locking their doors early. Parents kept their children close, and college students traveled in nervous groups, constantly looking over their shoulders. Police cruisers roamed the neighborhoods like restless sharks circling invisible prey. The fear was real, thick, and heavy. And yet, even with all the caution, it wasn't enough. Elowen Kitt was known for her discipline and her routines. A yoga instructor who taught evening classes at a popular studio near Zilker Park, she was loved by her students for her calm energy and kindness. She often stayed late after class, cleaning up the studio or practicing alone, enjoying the silence. It was on one of these late evenings, after a quiet Wednesday class, that Elowen disappeared. Security footage captured her locking up the studio at 9:47 p.m. She wore simple black leggings and a gray sweatshirt, her hair pulled back into a loose braid. She waved goodbye to a coworker, walked toward her car in the adjacent parking lot, and then simply vanished from view. Witnesses later reported seeing a tall figure standing across the street that night, watching the studio from the shadows. No one recognized him. No one saw where he went, and no one heard a thing. For 2 nights, Elowen's friends and family organized searches, calling her name through parks, parking lots, and abandoned buildings. Flyers with her smiling face appeared on every light pole in South Austin. Hope started to fade when her car was found undisturbed, still parked neatly where she had left it, her bag sitting on the passenger seat untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, no shattered glass, no dropped phone. On the 3rd night, a maintenance worker found her body. It was positioned deliberately against a massive, colorful sculpture in a public square near the Riverwalk, a place filled with tourists by day but deserted by night. Around her, dozens of candles flickered in the breeze. Some had melted into the pavement. Others were still burning weakly. She had been dressed in a white gown, one that didn't belong to her. The spiral symbol had been carved into the base of the sculpture, larger and deeper than before, as if the killer was growing bolder. The city erupted into full panic. Public officials held press conferences promising swift action. Crime Stoppers hotlines were flooded with calls, many from terrified citizens convinced they had seen something. Someone suspicious at a gas station, a strange car circling the block, a shadowy figure lurking near a bus stop. Most of the tips led nowhere. The killer stayed invisible, slipping through the city's tightened grip with ease. Detective Marla Vexley sat in her office surrounded by case files, photos, and timelines, searching for the one thread that would unravel everything. That was when she noticed it. All 3 victims, Lyra, Gavin, and now Elowen, had a connection. They had all, at different times in their lives, volunteered or worked at the same small community center in East Austin. It wasn't much, just an aging brick building with a playground and a few classrooms, but it had served as a hub for after-school programs, summer camps, and charity events. Over the years, thousands of people had passed through its doors, but in all the noise, that small link between the victims had been overlooked. Vexley realized the killer wasn't choosing his victims randomly. He was working off a list, one, that only he knew. Somehow, something had happened at that community center, something important enough for someone to hold a grudge for years. Now, one by one, the people connected to that forgotten past were being hunted down, marked, and silenced. The motive was hidden, buried deep beneath a decade of normal life. But it was there. And as Vexley spread the names of former volunteers and workers across her investigation board, she knew with a sinking feeling that the killer was far from finished. In fact, he was just getting started. Detective Marla Vexley spent the next few days buried in old records, cross-referencing names, photos, and volunteer lists from the East Austin Community Center. There were hundreds of names to sift through, but she focused on those connected closely to the timeline. She marked each person who had volunteered or worked there during a certain 3-year window when all 3 victims had been active. Patterns slowly began to emerge. Lyra, Gavin, and Elowen had all attended a summer program there in the same year. They had been teenagers then, barely out of middle school. It was a place where kids from all backgrounds came together, some to escape trouble at home, others just looking for something to do. But what had happened there that was dark enough to lead to murder so many years later? Vexley found whispers in old news clippings about a tragic accident involving a staff member during that summer. An assistant counselor named Heath Dane had drowned during a late-night swimming trip gone wrong. The reports were vague, citing unfortunate circumstances and miscommunication among the group. No criminal charges were filed. The case had quietly faded into the background, chalked up to a freak accident. But Vexley knew accidents didn't leave scars deep enough to inspire this kind of violence. She started digging deeper into Heath. Dane's history, uncovering something chilling. Heath hadn't been alone when he drowned. He had been with a group of campers, several of whom were now dead. As Vexley traced the names of other kids who had been at the river that night, her list narrowed further. There were 5 names in total, including Lyra, Gavin, and Elowen. 2 names remained unaccounted for. One belonged to Jessa Rourke, a private nurse who now lived on the outskirts of the city. The other was Emory Slate, a name that sent an immediate chill down Vexley's spine. Emory had a criminal record. Small offenses, mostly vandalism and trespassing, but enough to suggest a pattern of unrest boiling just beneath the surface. He had spent time in and out of psychiatric care during his teenage years. His last known address was in East Austin, just a few miles from the community center itself. Vexley felt a terrible certainty forming. Emory Slate wasn't just another name on the list. He was the list. A kid who had never recovered from whatever happened that night at the river, who had grown into a man carrying a festering rage no one had noticed or understood. And now, one by one, he was hunting down the people he believed were responsible for his pain. Acting quickly, Vexley dispatched officers to Jessa Rourke's home. If Emory was following a pattern, Jessa was in immediate danger. They arrived just before midnight to find the house dark and the front door ajar. Inside, there, were signs of a struggle: overturned furniture, a shattered lamp, blood droplets leading out the back door, but no sign of Jessa herself. The backyard gate was left swinging open in the breeze, leading to a dense patch of woods that stretched for miles behind the property. A search party was formed immediately, but no one knew how far Emory might have gotten or what he intended to do next. Back at headquarters, Vexley issued an urgent manhunt for Emory Slate. His face was plastered across every news station, his name repeated in every news bulletin, but catching him would not be easy. Emory knew the city well, especially its forgotten corners. The abandoned warehouses, the hidden paths along the river, the crumbling service tunnels beneath the streets. He had lived in the margins his entire life, unseen, slipping between worlds the way a shadow slips across a wall. Vexley stood over the investigation board late that night, the weight of it all pressing down on her. She knew Emory wouldn't stop until his twisted sense of justice was satisfied. And she knew he was already planning his final moves. Somewhere in the city, Jessa was either fighting for her life or already beyond saving. And Vexley feared that even if they found her in time, the nightmare Emory Slate had unleashed on Austin was far from over. It was building toward something even more horrifying, something that no one was ready to face. The search for Jessa Rourke stretched into the cold hours before dawn. Officers combed through the dense woods behind her home, flashlights slicing through the darkness, dogs picking up fleeting trails before losing them again. Every snapped twig, every rustling branch set nerves on edge. Yet no one found her. It was as if she had been swallowed by the forest itself. Detective Marla Vexley knew they were running out of time. Emory Slate was not just playing a sick game. He was following a plan, each move calculated, each disappearance escalating toward something larger. At sunrise, a break came, though not the kind anyone wanted. A jogger along the riverwalk stumbled upon a gruesome scene, a small wooden boat, floating aimlessly near the bank, its sides painted with the same spiral symbol that had haunted the case from the beginning. Inside the boat lay Jessa's body, pale and motionless, a white flower placed carefully in her folded hands. The river's slow current rocked the boat gently, a nightmarish cradle drifting toward the heart of the city. Jessa had been silenced. Like the others, her life snuffed out without noise or witness. Emory Slate had struck again. Austin plunged deeper into fear and despair. Rumors spread like wildfire, stories of Emory hiding in storm drains, slipping between abandoned subway tunnels, stalking crowded places while wearing stolen clothes. Some even claimed they had seen him standing motionless on crowded sidewalks, blending into the background like a ghost. The police presence increased, but it never felt like enough. People stayed indoors after dark, barricading their doors and windows, praying the nightmare would somehow burn itself out. But Vexley knew better. Emory wasn't done. He had crossed off 4 of the 5 names from his list. One name remained, his own. Through interviews with old counselors and former staff members, Vexley pieced together a clearer, darker picture of what had happened that fateful summer. Heath Dane's drowning had not been an accident. The counselors had covered up the truth to protect the program and themselves. Heath had been abusive toward several campers, including Emory. One night, desperate and terrified, a group of kids had confronted Heath near the river. A struggle broke out. In the chaos, Heath had fallen into the water and drowned. The adults had hidden the real story, terrified of the consequences, branding it an accident to preserve the center's reputation. They forced the children into silence, convincing them it was better for everyone. Emory, already fragile, carried the guilt and anger alone. He had spent his teenage years lost in rage and confusion, growing up in the shadows of that night. Now, with all the others gone, Vexley realized Emory would turn the final act of his plan inward. His final target wasn't another person. It was himself. But he wouldn't simply disappear quietly. He wanted to make the city remember him, to make the people who had ignored his suffering feel every ounce of the terror he had lived with for years. Vexley pushed every available officer into overtime, setting up patrols near potential targets, public parks, monuments, the community center itself. But Emory was always one step ahead. The final act came in the heart of the city. Late one night, an explosion rocked the abandoned East Austin Community Center. Flames shot into the sky, illuminating the streets for miles around. Firefighters battled the blaze through the night, but the building was reduced to ashes. Among the wreckage, they found human remains, later confirmed to be Emory's. His spiral symbol had been painted across every wall of the center before it burned, a final message seared into the city's memory. In the aftermath, Austin struggled to heal. Memorials sprung up along the river near the sculpture, outside the bars and studios where lives had been lost. People lit candles and left flowers, whispering prayers for the victims and, in some strange way, for Emory too. Detective Vexley closed the file on the case, but she knew it would never truly be over. The city had been changed forever. Some nights, when the streets grew too quiet and the river fog rolled in heavy, people claimed they could still see the faint outline of a spiral drawn into the mist, a grim reminder that some ghosts never leave.